A furious roar echoed through the darkness. How dare she refuse? The heroine, gripping a bloodied blade, was drenched in blood, her entire dress stained crimson. She had to flee, and quickly. Terrified, she ran. The empire was enveloped in the night's shadows, with the moon and stars lighting her escape. The cold river currents raged as the girl saw her bloody reflection in the water. There was no other option. The river waves were fierce. If she jumped in, she would surely die. Cold sweat and salty tears streamed down her face. She wouldn't die, it was already fated. The helpless heroine shivered from the cold wind on the ship's bow, but she didn't feel it. Perhaps it was better this way, if only she could avoid such a grim fate. She was exhausted and terrified. Closing her eyes, she took a deep breath, wishing for it to end quickly. Her blood-stained hands slowly released the ship's railing. Her fingers obeyed, unclenching, and the graceful figure in the bloody dress began to fall, inevitably, into the violent river below. Defying her fate was the heroine's last thought before the strong current swallowed her up. The waves crashed above her head. 6 months later, the people of the empire were peacefully starting their day in the main square. In a quiet corner, a sign hung, Cardinal Café, a favorite spot among locals. Ah, I wish I could meet the main character already. When will she appear? The girl's name was Lorena. She worked as a servant for Duke Clavin. She had once been a 27-year-old girl from South Korea named Laura, but 6 months ago she was transported into this novel, titled The Blind Beast's Flower. Her employer was the novel's protagonist, Elon Clavin, the Empire's greatest sword fighter, undefeated and blessed by the heavens, known for his famous red eyes. He had many titles, but now he was called the Blind Beast. During one battle, he was poisoned and lost his ability to fight. However, the antidote was a flower in his garden, which bloomed for only 10 days. The heroine, Karina, found the flower and restored the beast's sight. Elon then proposed to her. Lorena's task was to bring them together without interfering with the plot. Perhaps if she succeeded, she could return to her own world. But in this novel, she only read. What was her role in all of this? Was she just a secondary character, a faceless one who appeared in a romantic scene? The main character had asked the young man to stop because servants were nearby, and Duke Clavin had ordered the top maid to leave without any mention or recognition. That was all the maid's role in this novel. Seemed simple enough, but where was Karina? The flower had bloomed a week ago, so why hadn't Lorena figured out what she was doing wrong? Why wasn't the heroine here yet? After all, Lorena's return home depended on how the story ended. She couldn't stay in this world forever. Soon, Elon would return from his meeting with the Emperor, and as his only servant, Lorena would be severely punished. She had left her blind master without any help, and the beast had no other servants. She couldn't wait here any longer. She needed to go inside and figure out what was going on. A voice rang out from Cardinal. "Welcome. Is there anything the young lady needs?" Lorena was looking for someone. Silver hair, emerald eyes, such a look couldn't go unnoticed. Of course, beauty was the hallmark of every main character. The young lady's comment didn't mean much. The young man only saw a beautiful lady with violet eyes. The bald guest frowned at the maid, displeased. Did they all really look the same? What had his friend been saying? The man pointed to the wall. That lady over there looks just like the girl from the poster. Elsia Uther, golden hair, violet eyes. Wanted, don't harm, capture, and report to the Temple of Huna. The reward for her capture is 99,799 gold. Another day in Nola. There were only 3 days left before the flower withered. What a silly world of romantic novels. It seemed impossible to even find the main character. Let this golden-haired girl slow down, someone muttered. Then a heavy hand landed on the girl's wrist. What's this ignorant orc doing? One man sneered. It's definitely the lady from the poster. There's a huge reward for her. The men weren't interested in the maid. They just wanted to take her to the temple and claim their reward. Was Lorena just a cow to them? People weren't supposed to be sold. Didn't they know she could kick like a cow? What did he say, Asan? Someone asked. Oh, that bastard bit him. Then a threatening silhouette appeared behind the scoundrels. With a swift motion, the mighty beast threw the bald man away from the girl. He crashed heavily onto the road. What was this impudent man doing? He and his friend were the first to find this lady. She was their target. He understood what needed to be done, so he told the young man to leave. They didn't want any trouble. The blind beast immediately grabbed his servant, his hand warm and firm, signaling for him to stop. Lorena couldn't believe how these idiots were treating the lady so rudely. Wait a minute, this guy was blind, wasn't he? The friend, still stunned, had just been thrown to the ground with a single motion from the blind man. He laughed and suggested that the other guy get out of their way. The girl was their prey, and the noble, blind beauty was no longer a concern. The young man didn't want to ruin his handsome face either, so he should go find another companion. There were plenty of women in the Empire. The girl, however, was needed by them. Lorena squealed in fear, warning Elon to be careful. How was it possible that, without even seeing his opponents, the beast took them down with one hand? Elon was truly the greatest warrior. That's why the maid had abandoned Duke Claven. She had wanted adventure, but this wasn't what she expected. She had just wanted to have tea with Elon after his meeting with the Emperor, but she wasn't even at the mansion when he came looking for her. It was dangerous for a young man to walk alone, but Elon just went ahead and did it. This was truly the answer of the main character. Lorena had wanted to visit this cafe for a long time. Why was it so easy for the young man with his title and merit to talk to her? This was the famous Cardinal Cafe. Well, since they were both there, they might as well have some tea together. Lorena would be happy. Finally, her plan had worked. She might just get to meet the tardy Karina here. Mr. Elon wanted the same tea and chocolate as the maid. That was right, just like his meeting with the Emperor. Even though she saw the beast every day, she still admired its incredible beauty every time. There he was, the main character in the flesh. His Majesty had an urgent discussion with the best warrior in the Empire. The Duke usually didn't leave the house, so this was the first time Lorena had seen him in a formal tailcoat, and it suited him so well. The Emperor was concerned that, at his age, it was time for Elon to get married for the continuation of the Claven line. Why did that matter to him? And who was chosen as the bride? Elon didn't know. Apparently, his lordship would decide. How romantic, what nonsense. The maid nervously hit the table. Why was she reacting like that? It wasn't her who was getting married, but what about true feelings, a connection stronger than time and death? Where was all this romance people talked about in short stories? Lorena couldn't understand why she was shouting among the nobility. This was a common thing. Marriage was a political and economic union, and Elon would have to spend his entire life with this girl. So, they must have feelings for each other. It was important to choose a partner with your heart, then the choice would definitely be right. For instance, Karina, the main character, had to fall in love with the main heroine, right? What kind of beast hadn't read fairy tales? Lorena truly believed this. Of course she did. Marriage without love was a sad event, and it was the reason she needed to return to her world. Let Lorena think for herself. Who needed such a beast? A blind husband was nothing but a burden, that's all. Lorena thought about hitting him now. He was handsome and would surely find love, or maybe not. The maid had been helpful to the Duke, but even now she felt the gazes of others on her. After all, she was looking at Elon. These were the onlookers, the pigeons, and they shouldn't even be here. The maid was just clumsy, and that's why she attracted attention. Lorena had red hair, blue eyes, and dark skin. She looked like the South Korean flag. What's Korea? Someone asked, but the truth was her appearance was indeed rare. Could Elon touch it? Why? The maid had said her appearance was unusual, so the Duke became curious. Suddenly he realized she might have been lying. After all, when you lose your sight, your other senses become sharper. But Elon was her employer, and it wouldn't be easy to refuse him. It felt like the main character could still see right through her. So, he let the young man touch her. Elon carefully pulled off his glove and asked for forgiveness for his unexpected outburst. He had become really curious. It was Lorena's fault, after all. The maid carefully intercepted the protagonist's wrist and gently guided his hand toward her face. Lorena placed his palm on her cheek. The main character's palm was strangely cold, but at the same time pleasant and magnetic. Strong fingers began to trace the features of her face, moving up to her chin. A strange feeling flashed through her, and then the beast's hand slowly withdrew. Lorena sighed sadly and shook her head. She looked at the Duke, waiting for his reaction. He noticed something, unsure whether he could understand that she had deceived him. The main character broke into a radiant smile. The girl really did have an unusual appearance, and he couldn't help but think how cute she was. Oh, if only she were a different character. But then he remembered Lorena had come for another purpose. As for the cafe, judging by the sounds, it was full of people. The Cardinal Cafe was located on the main square with round tables like those in the Duke's mansion. The windows had light curtains, but they were dirty, clearly not washed in a long time. The sun was shining brightly through the fluffy clouds, and the view was beautiful. The atmosphere felt so pleasant. Lorena had lied today, but if Elon didn't like this place, he might never come back. This cafe was supposed to be the meeting place with Karina. She was an orphan from a village, adopted by a noble relative and brought to the capital. Before her debut, she had wandered into this cafe and was attacked by bandits. That's when Elon, leaving his mansion for the first time, saved Karina. Afterward, they became good friends. Karina then visited the young man in his mansion, found a healing flower in his garden, and restored his sight. But by now, Elon should have already met Karina and regained his sight. Only 2 days were left, and Lorena wondered where this frivolous girl was. A person's life was at stake here. By the way, the Duke had been meaning to ask the maid about the meaning of her name. It was unusual after all. The young master knew that the maid had recently lost her memory, and she would like to know it too. If she explained the meaning of the name Lorena, the story would definitely drag on. It seemed like the girl was finally coming to her senses. Thank God she was alive, she was covered in blood, and the elderly couple had expected the worst. What kind of place is this? They wondered. Apparently, the girl was from a noble family, and they asked how she felt. She seemed fine, but the elderly woman's face froze in confusion as she asked what the poor girl had just said. Maybe Lorena had ended up in a remote village on the outskirts. This was Laura's first memory after her rebirth. If she reached the end of her story, she would probably be able to return to her home. The first thing she did was look for a job, and the only offer she got was as a servant to Duke Claven. Since the girl had no documents, this was the only acceptable option for work. All the other maids had run away from the Duke's mansion. Despite the good fee, the lady remained frozen. Was she going to take the job or not? The question lingered in the air. Her name was Lorena, a typical name one would find in a romantic novel. When she arrived at the mansion, it quickly became clear that the beast lived in utter despair. A great hero who could track his target using only his unique instincts, blindness shouldn't have been a problem. Yet, Elon had given up his title as the greatest knight and all his accolades after being poisoned. The strongest and most beautiful warrior had lost the will to live. The maid looked around nervously and swallowed hard. She brought her master his clothes. The poisoned beast had become a true horror to people. They couldn't understand his pain and despair, so they were afraid of him. But Elon Claven didn't want to be understood. He didn't want anything to be understood. He had simply plunged into eternal darkness. All the servants ran from the knight as if he were a monster. The maids even threw their clothes on the floor by the door, afraid to enter his room. Everyone except Lorena. She knew that a beautiful soul was trapped within those walls of oppression and pain. The new maid entered her master's private chambers with ease. Lorena had never tried to escape from the beast. She wasn't afraid of it. In fact, she returned to it every day. The maid tidied up his bedroom, took care of his daily needs, and made sure he ate. The soup was still hot. She just needed to wait a little. Today, the young master had chicken broth. It would do him good, so he had to open his mouth. Lorena secretly admired and cared deeply for the main character. At first, the hunted beast had trouble trusting his only servant, but the maid returned to him day after day, witnessing all his pain and suffering. Most importantly, Lorena never gave up, even with the main character's unwillingness to live. So what did the handsome warrior think of the fresh chicken broth? The soup was really tasty, and step by step, Elon Claven began to pull himself out of his despair and depression. He got a cane for the blind and began practicing with it. After 2 years of being bedridden, Elon began to walk again. After 6 months of Lorena's care and support, the beast finally recovered and began to live once more. "You must be very tired today," Lorena said. "It's been a busy day. I'll bring you dinner." The main character sighed heavily and threw his head back. He knew he shouldn't have indulged in his fantasies. It was foolish to expect the girl to see a man in him just because he was... The day felt weak and feeble, but it was also so friendly. The sun shone brightly, even through the curtain. The maid wanted to ask something. Had the young gentleman ever been to the Cardinal Café? Although it was a place for commoners, it was still quite popular. The main character crossed his arms, unsure of what she meant. He had never even heard of such a cafe. Was it really a famous spot in the capital, and why was she asking him about it? The maid explained that it was a fairly well-known place in the empire. She almost forgot, but she had to take a report from Bernard, the local priest, who managed the staff at the Claven Duke's mansion. The cardinal was usually where couples met, but Bernard didn't need to know how Elon was aware of it. After all, how could he ignore the curiosity of others? Bernard was free to be interested, but it was time for him to get back to work. The maid decided to start with this month's reports. The main character couldn't help but wonder, lovers met at this cafe, huh? Why had she brought up this place? Was Lorena planning to visit this place with Elon? But why would she need him in such a romantic spot? And how could he be so foolish to think that Lorena might have any feelings for him? The blind beast sighed heavily. He was nothing but a burden to everyone. How could anyone love him? What an idiot he was to dare to hope his life might once again have meaning, that light might shine in it. But no, that would never happen. This girl would never love him. Today, the main character was able to touch her. It was both exciting and necessary for him. When his fingers touched Lorina's skin, he felt her closeness, and for a moment, everything felt okay. Elon painfully squeezed his fingers, letting go of the ghost of his hope. She lived a full life while he only built illusions. She didn't see a man in the beast, which wasn't surprising because in the end he was weak and blind. No one could ever truly love a hunted animal, he could only count on pity. The maid quietly knocked on Elon's bedroom door. It was time for the master to have dinner. "Let Lena come in," Elon said. "What's on the menu today?" The maid smiled and told him to guess. He'd definitely like it. Judging by the smell, it was sausages with spices. That's right, today Sir Elon had sausages on the grill. "Eat carefully, young master, the sausages are very hot." The maid blew gently on the food to cool it down so it wouldn't cause discomfort. She had searched all day but still couldn't find that damn Karina. In the end, she had to write her a letter asking for a meeting. For some reason, Lorina's persistent letter had gone unanswered. Maybe they would just kidnap her and bring her here despite her rudeness and persistence. This seemed to frighten the main character. Something was clearly bothering Lorina. She sighed heavily for the 10th time. How could the young man help her? The maid apologized, explaining that she had unknowingly made her master worry. Everything was fine, though. These were just personal experiences. Instead of focusing on her work, Lorina declared that she was flying in the clouds, an employee of the year, so to speak. By the way, Elon himself seemed to be in a bad mood. It had started after their visit to the cafe. What was going on? Lorina had really wanted to go to that cafe. Yes, she had mentioned it, but the maid didn't seem to like it much. She was constantly distracted. Lorina was a fine young woman, straight as an arrow, but this was her first time in the capital. She hadn't had a chance to walk around and explore. So that was the issue. How did she like the capital compared to her village? It was a new era of civilization. There were even sidewalks, everything paved with tiles. Where did Lorina come from? There were so many beautiful people here. As she looked around, she noticed that everyone seemed to have stepped out of a picture. In that case, they could take a little walk. Wasn't the young gentleman tired? Not at all. A silver moon was shining brightly above the Duke's mansion. It was big and bright tonight, and to the left, beautiful yellow flowers the size of Elon's palm had bloomed. They only bloomed under the light of the moon. Mother Alona had loved these flowers dearly. Indeed, tonight the moon was brighter than ever. Where was the treasured healing flower that was supposed to restore the main character's sight? It seemed to be hiding in the inky beauty of the night. What a relief. The flower hadn't started to fade yet. It just needed a couple more days while Karina was still somewhere around. Lorina seemed to enjoy the silence, simply relishing the blooming flowers. There were so many of them, and the view was absolutely stunning. Elon was glad that the maid found joy in these things because, due to him, she never went anywhere. But enough of this nonsense. Lorina was ready to serve the beautiful young man faithfully and truly until the end. She would soon scold him for such words, but while the Duke was away from the estate, she herself had gone for a walk, and Elon didn't seem to have listened to her at all. She was just curious, that's all. She was still The girl didn't mind working for Elon, and in fact, she had it pretty good from Bernard later on. She had already received her due. The young man smiled, realizing there were still places Lorina would like to visit. He told her to let him choose the destination, but Lorina would go with him wherever he wanted. Since he couldn't see, it would be better for her to decide. Elon then suggested they take a walk in Trail Park, which had very picturesque views. Lorina was excited and said they'd go there the next day. She was grateful for his efficiency, and they were sure to have a great time. The park was located on the property of the count who had adopted Karina, and they would finally be able to meet her there. However, the main character froze, suddenly realizing something. Why did the young man stop? If the Duke had other plans for tomorrow, it wouldn't be a big deal and they could reschedule their walk. But that wasn't the issue. Elon had just realized that he had absolutely no experience walking with ladies. What a turn of events, a wonderful young man with a beautiful soul and heart, yet completely clueless in this regard. Surely, there must be many other people in the popular spots of the capital, right? Lorina nodded, but the blind beast couldn't lose face and disgrace himself in front of others. He decided they should practice before such an outing in public. Maybe Lorina could help him with this. Elon gallantly extended his hand to the maid, and her heart began to race. What was she doing? They hadn't been together long, and Laura was from another world. This wonderful young man was destined for someone else. Elon didn't want to draw attention to them, so their walk needed to look natural. That made sense to Lorena. She placed her hand into the beast's palm. The greatest warrior straightened his back and walked forward proudly, guiding his companion. Step by step, Lorena couldn't keep up with him at all. It became clear that the strongest swordmaster was far from the high society. When they walked side by side, their steps should have been the same length, but Lorena felt like a chicken chasing a long-legged heron. However, for the walk to look natural, they really had to try. Lorena asked Elon to slow down as they needed to sort something out. As soon as her hand rested on the beast's forearm, Elon immediately froze, wondering what she was doing. This would make walking much more comfortable since the Duke was much taller than Lorena, and by doing this, their steps would match. Noticing the awkward pause and Elon's bewilderment, Lorena immediately pulled her hand back. Apparently, the young man was uncomfortable, but Elon quickly intercepted her hand and returned it to him. He realized that Lorena was right. It was indeed much more comfortable to walk this way. A warm smile appeared on his face. Now, they should try again and develop a more natural walking pace. As they continued, Lorena noticed the abundance of food in front of them. It looked like enough to feed a whole squad of knights, and everything smelled so delicious. Bernard straightened up proudly and explained that a whole squad was going on a walk today. It was the second time Elon was going out, making it a special occasion. Bernard had spent the entire night cooking and was thrilled for his master. He couldn't wait to see him enjoying the walk. He and Lena would go together too. Lorena raised an eyebrow, surprised by how Bernard had managed to sneak up on them. The mansion was so quiet, but Bernard was just being a good boy. The manager, however, wanted to see Elon bask in the sun as well, and he was happy about his improvements. Lorena reminded him not to be jealous, as it would be more fun with company. Elon, however, insisted he didn't need nannies or servants around. They could go their separate ways. Lorena agreed, but she said the servants should stay nearby so it would be easier to get to know Karina. Bernard happily agreed and jumped up and down in joy. The sun shone brightly, reflecting off the crystal-clear surface of the lake in the park. An ideal day for a promenade. Bernard looked at Elon like a proud parent, waving his hand as they set off. Despite it only being spring, the sun was exceptionally hot and many people were out for walks. Lorena suggested that she could fan Elon, but he refused. She mused about how amazing the day was and hoped that maybe today the plot would finally progress. She was, of course, very worried about Karina's absence and the inconsistencies in the storyline, but she knew everything would work out. She wasn't interfering. Suddenly, Lorena noticed a wasp flying dangerously close to Elon. She panicked. This giant striped insect could knock him unconscious with just one sting. Lorena quickly grabbed her fan, determined to protect Elon from the threat. The buzzing and annoying sound of the wasp grew louder, and Lorena feared the worst. The wasp was about to sting, but she wouldn't let it happen. She stood ready to shield the main character. Lorena swung her fan with precision and hit the wasp just before it reached Elon's face. The defeated insect flew onto the blanket of two frightened ladies nearby. Elon looked ahead in shock, his hair tossed back from the force of Lorena's swift movement. Lorena was just trying to protect him, but she didn't want to alarm him by worrying. In her attempt to scare the monster away, she tripped and ended up landing right on top of the main character. It felt like something out of a romantic novel. In her real world, she would have fallen into the mud or worse. Elon was too close to her now. Lorena immediately apologized, assuring him that he was unharmed. She had only tripped while chasing the wasp away from him. Lorena's cheeks flushed red, a warm feeling spreading through her body. She quickly reminded herself that this man was definitely not for her. Lorena jumped to her feet, determined to chase the impudent wasp back, and vowed to defeat it. She needed to change the subject quickly. It was so embarrassing. Perhaps the main character had a way of captivating every girl with just one look. Meanwhile, Bernard had been working hard on making sandwiches. He explained how to hold them so they wouldn't get dirty. Hours later, at the Harrington estate, Lorena had a message for Miss Karina. She wanted to speak with her, but since she had no documents, she had arrived late, after their picnic had taken much longer than expected. Lorena was considering visiting the dress shop, but if Elon went with her, everyone would assume they were a couple. It was really Lorena who wanted to see Karina. She owed her a lot, but she lied and told the man in the tailcoat that Karina would be happy to see her. Unfortunately, Karina wasn't in the mansion at the moment. The man cleared his throat and explained that the main character was at the Imperial Palace and had no time for personal meetings. Meanwhile, Karina was admiring the view from the palace, thinking how beautiful it was, but acknowledging that the lady herself was even more beautiful. She turned around in embarrassment, aware that her words meant little to the crown prince. She was the adopted daughter of the Earl of Harrington, Countess Harrington, and the crown prince had said the same thing to every lady at court. The prince asked Karina not to look at him in such a way as it hurt him. With casual ease, the future ruler kissed the heroine's hand and threw out his compliments. Crown Prince Xavier Odor Constance never imagined that he would speak such words from the bottom of his heart. For some reason, Karina didn't fully believe the future ruler's words, but she couldn't understand what was stopping her from fixing this. Maybe calling the crown prince by his first name would help win his trust. But Lady Harrington couldn't call the heir to the throne by name. Was this a refusal to obey royal orders? The future emperor gently squeezed Karina's chin and assured her it was simple, that it would be easy. From her lips, his name sounded beautiful. With one swift movement, Xavier pulled Karina towards him and kissed her as the sun set, and in that moment, new feelings began to stir within her. Xavier whispered to her, reminding her that when they were alone, she should address him by his first name. The moment was interrupted when the crown prince's assistant nervously ran up to him, whispering something in his ear. Xavier's face immediately changed, and he announced that there was an urgent matter to attend to, so he would be leaving. He promised to meet Karina again the next day at the same spot. Before leaving, Xavier kissed Karina on the forehead and told her to stop calling him Your Highness or there would be consequences. After the crown prince left, Karina covered her face in embarrassment. This was her first kiss, and her cheeks immediately turned pink. The moment was both exciting and pleasant. It was everything Karina imagined true love to be. She felt that her other half's name was Xavier. Lady Harrington was elated when Karina was adopted, and now even more so. Karina would soon marry a member of the imperial family. She was stunned by the thought, but then she couldn't help but think about Laura and Elon. Everything around her seemed shrouded in darkness. Everything had been lost. She was doomed. She hated that the heroine so suddenly had fallen in love with the heir to the throne. It disgusted her. How was this possible? The heroine had broken the rules of the plot, and now the ending would be different. Poor Elon would never see the light. Could he ever be healed without love? How could she face him now? She knew that he couldn't be saved. Finally, the maid returned. She wondered why the young gentleman hadn't gone to bed yet. It was high time for him to rest. Lorena herself was also exhausted. She had promised she wouldn't be gone for so long. She asked for forgiveness, explaining that she had gotten lost on the way back. Elon, curious, asked why she hadn't taken a carriage, but she explained that she needed to save money. She gently helped Elon into bed, wondering if he needed anything more. She considered reading to him again. Was he having trouble sleeping again? She thought about grabbing the same book, but instead a large number of soldiers filled her thoughts. The enemy's forces were massive: 11,000 infantry, 5,000 cavalry, 6,000 artillery soldiers, and 800 guns. The soldiers went on the offensive while others moved to different locations, but just as she thought about bedtime stories, the peaceful sound of Elon's breathing broke her thoughts, followed by the soft snoring in the room. Lorena plopped down beside him on the bed, and Elon carefully covered her with a blanket. She must have been very tired after such a long day. Let her rest, he thought. The main character tried to move the book from beneath the maid's cheek but failed. Accepting it, Elon laid down next to her. He listened to the sound of her breathing, feeling a sense of peace. In the endless darkness, he felt not alone. Lorena had mentioned earlier that if he accompanied her to the dress shop, people might think they were a couple. Bernard immediately agreed with the idea, but he noted that Elon had been out too long and needed to go home. However, the main character wanted to spend more time with Lorena. Bernard, like a capricious child, dragged him home. Elon wondered why Lorena didn't want to go with him. Was she ashamed to be seen in such places with him? He carefully reached for the sleeping girl's hand. He only intended to adjust her blanket, but in the process, he accidentally touched her. Just that small touch stirred something within him. She had become his guide, a blind man's companion, and it tore him apart. How could a blind beast like him ever be with her? How could she want that? There was a knock at the bedroom door. It was Bernard, ready to interrupt again. Elon sighed and motioned for the manager to enter. Bernard had arrived at such a late hour. The young gentleman had asked for fresh tea, and Bernard noticed that the light was still burning in the master's chambers. He knew that if anyone found out a maid was sleeping in the same room as Elon, it would cause trouble. Elon was fully aware of this, and he understood how delicate the situation was. Bernard then questioned why Elon didn't just make Lorena his favorite. He pointed out that she was just a servant without a family or surname, a mere slave to the noble lords. Elon immediately grew angry and told Bernard to keep quiet, warning him never to speak like that again. No matter who Bernard was to Elon, such a disrespectful thought would never be forgiven. Bernard, understanding the gravity of his words, nodded and promised it would never happen again. Elon then gently placed his hand on Lorena's fingers, thinking to himself that if only she shared his feelings, he would find a noble way to resolve their situation. The blind beast remained nearby, guarding the heroine as she slept. He would never harm her. Meanwhile, at the imperial palace, the crown prince remained awake like a nocturnal predator. The recent report had shaken him. He looked at the elderly couple kneeling before him, the ones who had found Lorena. The crown prince acknowledged their presence with a slight wave of his hand, signaling them to rise. He then asked them about their knowledge of the young lady. The couple had seen her 6 months ago by the riverbank, but they didn't know where she was now. They had taken her in that night when she was covered in blood, unconscious. She had stayed for only a short time before leaving for Kruger Castle. After that, they never saw her again. The crown prince was not satisfied with this answer and warned that if the couple was lying, they would pay the price with their lives. But the couple swore they were telling the truth. The crown prince, satisfied, raised his hand, signaling the end of the interrogation. He ordered the guards to escort the couple out of the palace. Then he turned to his assistant, instructing him on what to do next, his mind already preoccupied with the mysteries surrounding the young lady. The guard was instructed to remove the witnesses quietly, and everything was carried out according to the crown prince's wishes. Xavier, with his piercing blue eyes, realized with certainty that Alicia had survived the fateful night. His gaze darkened with determination. This time, Alicia would not escape from him. He would find her soon. The name Odor belonged to the first ruler of Constance, and it was also the divine title of succession to the throne. This legend had been passed down through generations ever since the founding of the empire. It was said that when the first emperor died, he ascended to godhood, leaving behind a revelation. In every generation, a child would be born with traits similar to him. These children, marked by black hair and red eyes, were the descendants of the god Odor. Their bodies exceeded human limits, they were masters of the sword, aging slowly, almost imperceptibly, and they were resistant to diseases and poisons. However, no one could have predicted the tragic fate of Elon, the greatest of Odor's descendants. As the strongest warrior, Elon led his squad into battle, only to fall into a trap. A special poison was released into the air, and there was no way to escape it. Elon's faithful horse was struck by the toxin and collapsed, and Elon was soon overcome by unbearable pain, as if his eyes were burning from acid. His loyal soldiers rushed to his side, but there was nothing they could do. On that horrific day, Elon lost his sight and the gifts that had been bestowed upon him by the first emperor. Despite every possible treatment, healers, shamans, and priests, all efforts failed. No one in the empire could cure the heir to the throne. In his despair, Elon considered suicide, but the beast inside him could not bring itself to end its own life. Every night, Bernard tied Elon's hands to prevent him from harming himself. Elon felt pity for Bernard, who had traveled the world in search of a cure. He had given up on wanting to die, but he no longer wished to live either. Rumors began to spread that a wild beast howled every night at Duke Claven's mansion. One evening, Elon opened his eyes and found Lorena asleep beside him, her leg thrown over him, snoring contentedly. How long had he been asleep like that? He had only lain down for a minute, but once again his thoughts were consumed by his despair. The man was trapped in a terrible nightmare, and judging by the sounds, Lorena was still deeply asleep. The girl stretched contentedly and began to open her eyes, feeling well rested. But wait, where had she ended up? She realized with a shock that she had spent the entire night in the main character's room. Lorena greeted Elon with a soft "good morning," wondering how he had slept. He replied that he hadn't slept very well, and then mentioned that Lorena had slept rather restlessly. It was a bit of a shame that she hadn't woken up when he tried, but it was what it was. Elon quietly hoped she wouldn't snore. Lorena had ended up sleeping in the bed of a young man who already had a lover, though he was completely unaware of her feelings. Lorena stopped herself and wondered what had happened. What was that strange expression on her face? She felt awkward and deflated. Her cheeks turned red with embarrassment. She was mortified, just wishing she could collapse in shame. Lorena couldn't help but notice that her cheeks still had a brown tint to them, and she couldn't deny that she had darker skin. Elon should just call if he needed anything, she thought. She herself needed to recover from the uncomfortable situation of the night before. As soon as she left the room, Lorena slammed the door behind her, feeling a mix of anger and self-loathing. What had she been doing? What a fool she felt like. She began to pound the innocent door in frustration, questioning why she hadn't simply gone to her own bed. After all, boys and girls should sleep in separate rooms, right? Despite being exhausted the night before, Lorena angrily hit her forehead against the wall, a trickle of blood running down her face. She was determined to find Karina. She had already fallen for a minor character who, according to the original plot, was supposed to end up with nothing. Meanwhile, the main character had completely ignored the Crown Prince. What had changed? Maybe she could still somehow bring Elon and Karina together. After all, they were both main characters and they should end up together, right? Lorena quickly realized that something was definitely wrong with the damn Crown Prince. If he was the villain of this novel, then he was an immoral and cruel freak. She should have read the book more carefully. Now, she would have to confront this secret villain. First things first, though, she needed to deal with Elon. Today was her day off, and she had ended up in the Harrington reception area. She had lied again, saying she was going shopping, but in truth, her priority now was to bring the main characters together. Everything would be okay. Lorena used to carry trays when she lived in the village, but she knew that wasn't proper etiquette. Karina, however, would handle the arrival of guests herself. There was no need for the servants to worry unnecessarily. Lorena had been waiting for this meeting for a long time. Miss Harrington must have been surprised by her sudden visit, but Karina was very curious. She asked why the guest had told the Count that she was Lady Karina's daughter. However, Karina herself didn't recall anything about this. The girl's name was Lena, and she had traveled all the way here. Yet, Karina couldn't even remember her. Lorena mentioned that the main character might remember the fortune teller she had met in the main square. Karina asked if Lorena really knew the fortune teller. Lorena explained that the fortune teller had been her grandmother. Karina was confused, but Lorena continued, saying that her grandmother had suffered from dementia. People around her were often afraid of her and would offend her, and no one loved her. However, the day before her grandmother passed away, she told Karina that she had given her 3 silver coins. Karina had no money left, but she had given everything she had so the fortune teller could eat and tell her the future. Lorena's grandmother had been grateful and said that a new life awaited Karina, with a great and passionate love coming her way, one with a dark-haired man. Thanks to Karina's kindness, her grandmother had been able to leave this world with a smile on her face. She held those coins close to her chest until her final breath, in memory of the ray of light that had been Karina. Lorena wanted to predict her own future now, as a token of gratitude, and if it wasn't too much to ask, she had one request. She asked Karina to meet one man, as it was a matter of life and death. Karina had the power to change someone's life, just as she had done with her grandmother. Lorena saw Karina as a ray of sunshine in the darkness. However, Karina was now engaged, and she couldn't do that. It would put her in an awkward position. She reminded Lorena that as her grandmother had predicted, her true love, her chosen one, had dark hair. This engagement wasn't just important for Karina, it was important for many others as well. She needed to be careful, as she would soon become a member of the imperial family, and rumors should be avoided. Karina was willing to help but could not. Lorena understood and acknowledged that it was a secret. But since Karina had shared her secret, Lorena could also speak of her love for the Crown Prince. In the Harrington household, they had told her the truth. Lady Karina truly loved her fiancé with all her heart. Lorena could feel that the situation with Elon mirrored the struggles in the plot. It was clear that the marriage between Karina and the Crown Prince had no political agenda. Karina was marrying for love. Lorena could sense the deep affection Karina had for the Crown Prince, and she wondered where she had gone wrong. How did Karina fall for this man so quickly? She couldn't change her feelings for her own good, but at the same time, she couldn't just leave Elon. What would happen to him now? Lorena knew he didn't deserve this. The maid, unaware of Karina's true situation, asked for something that was impossible. She wanted to read Karina's fortune. Karina, despite her doubts, was curious and decided to hear what the maid had to say. After the maid finished her reading, she left the Harrington estate, leaving Karina to ponder her words. They were far different from what her grandmother had told her. Believing her grandmother's fortune had been easy and joyful, but now the situation felt more complicated. Karina remembered the first time she met the Crown Prince Xavier at the Imperial Palace. She had dropped her scarf and he had picked it up and returned it to her. Later, he had escorted her to the palace. That had been the first time Xavier had ever seen or even heard of Karina. The Crown Prince, surprised by her beauty and grace, could not forget her name. It was in that moment that Karina believed destiny had brought them together. The maid soon called for Lady Harrington, urgently asking her to come downstairs. Karina quickly made her way down, only to learn that the Crown Prince had arrived at the Harrington estate, eager to meet with her. He had grown tired of waiting for Karina to visit the palace. If she had known, she would have prepared for his arrival. Xavier had warned her that if she called him by his title in private again, there would be consequences. But what did that punishment mean, Karina wondered, as Xavier's lips grew greedy and demanding. Karina would likely get used to this new dynamic, but was it too predictable, too cliché? Their love would initially be rejected by society, but in the end, their child would rule the world. Karina was determined to follow her heart, no matter the challenges. She trusted it would lead her to a better life. Deep down, Karina was certain she wanted to be with Xavier. This man was her future. After hearing those words, it became clear to the Crown Prince that he could no longer let Karina slip away. He knew she was destined for him, no matter what. The maid's words were a mistake, and Karina needed to focus on her true destiny with Xavier. There would be two men of noble blood in Karina's life, but she had to trust her instincts and not fear letting go of one if it felt wrong. The future was hers to shape, and with Xavier she would have everything she wanted. She would not be swayed by rivals, she would stay true to her destiny. Lorena's name was not on their list of clients, but she had mentioned buying dresses. However, there was only one boutique in the city. The main character realized with a shock that Lorena had lied to her, not just once, but several times. She couldn't understand why Lorena had done this to her. Elon, the blind beast, tried to escape the painful truth, but Bernard was equally confused about where Lorena could have gone. The main character sighed heavily, feeling helpless. He wanted answers too, but there was no point in searching anymore. Lorena had returned very late last night, lied again today, and then disappeared. Meanwhile, Lorena was making her way back to the beast's estate. Everything had gone wrong. She had been certain that once she met Karina, things would fall into place. Elon was exactly as the novel had described him, but something wasn't right. How was she supposed to untangle this mess? How could she even find her way home now? She needed to calm down and come up with a new plan. The circumstances had changed, and she had to adapt. The flower of hope might wither tomorrow, and the most beautiful young man, both in body and soul, might never regain his sight. This flower had to be used, but how? Lorena didn't know. She should have learned more from the main character. At least then, she might have had a chance to help Elon, but she had only been trying to get close to the main character. Exhausted from the day, Lorena decided she needed to return to the mansion, brew herself some tea, and regain her peace of mind. Only then would the solution come. The Claven estate was already close, and she quickened her pace. As she reached the main entrance, she almost ran straight into Elon. Why was he standing out there in the rain? Elon stood in the freezing rain, unprotected and soaked, which made it certain that he would catch a cold. However, the main character ignored the girl's questions, focused solely on finding out where Lorena had been. Lorena sneezed loudly, clearly sick from being drenched in rain. As she sneezed, the main character sighed heavily and decided that questions for today were off limits. The young man, with precision, moved to pick Lorena up. Her mind couldn't even comprehend the situation, his warm and strong hand on her waist. A second later, Lorena found herself in his arms. She was stunned by the suddenness of it, confused as to how it even happened. Elon, perhaps not fully aware of her thoughts, confessed to her quietly that he was not blind. Lorena could walk on her own, but the main character still carefully carried her to the bathroom, placing her gently on the floor. He suggested she take a hot bath to warm up, knowing she needed to avoid getting even sicker. The girl tried to protest, but he cut her off by slamming the door. Inside Duke Claven's personal bathroom, Lorena found herself feeling awkward, unsure of how to react to the situation, but since Elon had brought her there, she couldn't refuse, and she quickly got into the bath. As she soaked, she realized how luxurious the experience was, and while she wouldn't have the chance to enjoy such a bath again soon, the question of what to do next remained unresolved. Elon was relying on her, and the thought of him being blind without Karina hurt Lorena more than the fact that she couldn't return to her own world. To make things more complicated, she realized she was starting to like Elon too much. Everything had become so complicated. Meanwhile, Bernard, the manager, had a hard time holding the tray with the tea set. He was worried because his lordship was soaking wet, with cold drops dripping from his hair. The Duke had decided that walking in the pouring rain was somehow a good idea, but Bernard couldn't understand why. He asked Elon what had driven him to take such a risk, though Elon didn't answer. Bernard could only sigh at the lack of logic. At this rate, he feared he might lose his mind trying to understand Elon's behavior. Elon was acting like a child, and Bernard worried he might fall ill. The next morning, the maid brought breakfast to the protagonist's private quarters. Today was the day when the flower would wither, and with it, the last chance to cure Elon. For that reason, the girl had to find a solution before the end of the day. Elon looked like a zombie. He hadn't slept at all, his mind clearly preoccupied with something. It was obvious that something was bothering him. The young man wanted to express his thoughts, but he hesitated. He finally decided to ask her something. The maid, always ready to assist her master, promised to answer whatever questions he had. The protagonist took a deep breath and asked her what she thought of him. The question caught the maid off guard, and for a moment her heart skipped a beat. What could she say? She was unsure of how to respond. The handsome young man's cheeks flushed, clearly nervous. He wanted to know her honest opinion about him as he counted on her feedback. The maid, trying to hide her emotions, composed herself. She admired him greatly, as he had been the best employer and a caring leader. Elon was truly the example of what a noble person should be. But in her heart, Lorena thought differently. Elon, in her eyes, was the most noble and wonderful person she had ever known. She admired his strength, especially knowing how difficult it was for someone who had always been strong to deal with such pain. He faced it with honor and dignity, and Lorena couldn't help but admire him even more. After this heartfelt exchange, it was time to begin breakfast. The protagonist, still lost in thought, clutched the cutlery in his hands. He had one more question to ask the maid. As she tied a napkin around his neck, Lorena braced herself for the next inquiry. The young man wanted to know where she had gone the day before. Lorena was caught off guard, unsure of what to say. She couldn't tell him the truth. She couldn't say she had been shopping all day and met with friends. Finally, she decided to tell him she had found a way to restore his sight. Elon, skeptical, dismissed her claim. He had heard of no such cure, and he doubted it could be true. But Lorena, determined, insisted there was a method, though she was not entirely sure herself. Elon calmed down, clearing his throat. He had a hard time believing it, especially since even His Highness had tried and failed to heal him. But Lorena's persistence made him listen, as she believed that maybe, just maybe, there was hope after all. A girl had learned about a rare plant that could be used to make a decoction capable of curing any ailment. It was the same type of remedy they had attempted to use on the young man before. She believed there had to be a recipe left somewhere, and she needed to ask Bernard about it. Elon would agree to drink the potion, but Lorena wasn't getting her hopes up. She knew he would drink anything she gave him. Lorena swallowed nervously, placing her hand over his fingers, prepared to sacrifice everything, even her world, to restore Elon's sight. The moment was intense, and both their hearts raced. She vowed to him that she would help him regain his sight, no matter what it cost her. She would do whatever it took, even if it meant her own suffering. She squeezed his hand tightly, pouring all her feelings into that simple gesture. Elon froze, taking in the weight of the moment. Before pulling his hand back, his fist clenched. He couldn't let himself get carried away with false hope. He told her that the decoction wouldn't help, despite her devotion. He appreciated her care and commitment, but he didn't want her to expect too much. They needed to finish breakfast quickly, as the Duke still had business to attend to. The maid asked if he was really going to the town again. Elon confirmed that he needed to visit a tailor, but it wasn't for him. It was for Lorena. She had never gone to a tailor to buy herself a new dress, despite wanting to. She had always refrained from it, saying that her salary was enough for her needs. However, the Duke was informed that Lorena only had one dress to wear for outings, and that was a poor reflection on Duke Claven's honor as a nobleman. The maid hadn't even considered the implications of this before. The Duke's plan was clear. After breakfast, they would head to the boutique. The protagonist reluctantly scooped up some soup, feeling a bit uncomfortable with the situation. There was no mention of personal feelings toward the young man in Lorena's words, only a matter-of-fact response about work and salary. After a light breakfast, they went to the city's only boutique, where Emily, the shop owner, was eager to assist them. She thanked them for their visit and asked how she could help. The Duke had come to order several dresses for Lorena, though it seemed one would suffice. The boutique was known for its high prices, but it was clear that the Duke was prepared to pay for quality. The prices were high, and once the clothes were made, they would be returned to the employer, but for a simple maid without a name or proper papers, it was still too much. They needed 5 outfits, one for each season, and the first step was to take measurements. They started with spring. Elon couldn't believe what he was hearing. She was a servant, not a lady-in-waiting. The fabrics were all luxurious, but Elon knew that Lorena would only be using these dresses for mundane tasks like washing floors. It felt like a waste. Then the bell on the boutique door rang, signaling an unexpected visitor. A voice, sharp and nasty, pierced the air. Elon wondered why a blind man would even bother coming to a place like this. The voice belonged to Xavier, the crown prince, and the other residents were whispering about how he was more of a ruler than the emperor himself. As Xavier looked for a dress, Elon's face immediately soured. From where he was standing, he could already sense Xavier's stench of decay. The crown prince had no idea how his arrogance would make him leave the mansion, but Elon knew it was because of his narrow, primitive mind. The minor character, Xavier, immediately bared his teeth in envy. He had always envied Elon, a man with no equal. The noise grew louder and it became clear something was wrong. The girls were told to wait, and Emily, the boutique owner, would go check out the situation herself. She came out and bowed to the visitors, apologizing for being busy with a customer earlier. The rotten character, Xavier, took a step toward Elon, sneering. He couldn't understand how a blind man could be interested in clothing. Why did Elon even bother? It would be better if the so-called wounded beast stayed in his estate and saved his energy. Xavier was so concerned about his cousin, but it was clear he was only worried about his own place in the world. With a small, effortless motion, Elon pushed the envious man away. He needed to stop obsessing over his own worthlessness. After all, he only had his position because Elon had been poisoned. Not everyone was destined for greatness. Xavier immediately scoffed, saying it was funny that Elon, a blind man, would speak to the crown prince like that. Elon, despite his blindness, turned his head toward the guard and gave a sharp response. He said that only a fool would deny that there were still men equal to him in strength and swordsmanship. The guard was warned not to provoke him. Xavier couldn't understand why Elon was still standing there, especially after everything that had happened. It seemed ridiculous for Elon to even care about such trivial matters when there were bigger things at stake. The way Xavier spoke with such disdain made it clear how much he resented Elon. His words stung, though Elon remained calm, knowing he had no need to explain himself to Xavier. The crown prince had no right to interfere in his personal life. Despite this, Xavier was curious about Elon's motives. The thought crossed his mind, was Elon truly a man of integrity or just another hunter after wealth and power? He grasped the fabric of the fitting room, ready to intrude, but Elon's lightning-fast reflexes stopped him. With a precise movement, he grabbed Xavier's wrist. It left the villain frozen in horror. How was this possible? Elon had lost his sight, yet his speed and accuracy were unmatched. The envious Xavier couldn't comprehend it. Elon might not see with his eyes, but his strength came from something deeper, his fortitude, something Xavier would never understand. Enraged, Xavier's fury was palpable as he struggled to regain control. The crowd had gathered outside the boutique, watching in silence. They were all witnessing the crown prince's humiliation. Everyone knew Xavier had always envied Elon, and now he was attacking him after he had lost his sight. It was cowardly and not fitting for someone who would one day rule. Xavier immediately removed his hands from Elon, retreating with a sneer. The crown prince, now visibly shaken, ordered that the boutique attendant help Elon pick clothes for his companion. In response, Elon, despite being blind, chose the perfect outfit without needing to touch it. He had the keen instincts of someone who had been through much more than Xavier ever would. Xavier could only watch in disbelief. His next visit to the boutique, he promised himself, would be on his own terms. For now, he would let Elon handle his business even as he stewed with jealousy. The hours passed, and Duke Claven's carriage was filled with new dresses. The silence inside the carriage was suffocating. Lorena had to brace herself for what came next as the door creaked open and a familiar face poked through. Lorena was ready to tear that worthless person apart for Elon's sake, even if it meant spending the rest of her life in prison. She couldn't stand how disrespectful Xavier was, especially after everything Elon had done. To her, he was nothing but a degenerate, someone who couldn't even come close to being in Elon's shadow, not even in his own home. Lorena was so angry that she considered teaming up with Bernard to deal with Xavier, knocking him out, and then having Bernard run over him with a carriage. They agreed that enough words had been said. They weren't really talking about anything important, just discussing remedies as Lorena had found a way to cure Elon, but her fury burned at the thought of Xavier, who didn't deserve the respect he was given. Bernard agreed with her, and though they might have been discussing the cure, Lorena's anger was focused on the rotten prince. She would have taken down Xavier in an instant if she were dressed properly. She thought that with the right tools, she would have definitely come out victorious. Perhaps as a trophy, she would have taken his tongue, which wouldn't have been too much to ask. Meanwhile, Bernard commented on how Elon had his own hands and didn't need to be pampered like that. Lorena tried to calm herself, thinking it was unnecessary to waste her energy on Xavier. The weather grew worse, and Bernard brought the umbrella for Elon, knowing that Lorena had already been soaked the day before. She should wait for it in the carriage to avoid getting drenched again. Bernard, understanding everything, made sure she didn't get wet again. The weather had been so unpredictable, heavy downpours coming from nowhere. Lorena couldn't help but notice Elon looked concerned, his face holding a strange expression. She immediately noticed something was off. He leaned on her shoulder, the action somehow intimate yet filled with vulnerability. Elon, despite being the strong figure he was, didn't want to embarrass Lorena by showing weakness. A salty tear slid down his cheek, unnoticed by her at first. Lorena didn't want him to see it, she didn't want him to feel weak. It was a moment of quiet understanding between them, and despite the storm raging outside, it was as if time had stopped for just a moment. The rain continued to drip onto Elon's hands, and he knew he needed to get home. The roof of the carriage had a leak, and he had told Lorena that he would retire early tonight, leaving her free. But Lorena could only think of the crown prince, that rotten bastard who had somehow wormed his way into power. How did this man, who hated the empire and its people, end up in such a position of authority? It felt like a death sentence for the entire empire. Lorena's mind swirled with anger as she thought about the crown prince, but she quickly snapped back to reality when she remembered the flower. Today was the last day it could bloom, and she had almost forgotten the most important task. She needed to pick the flower before it was too late. Karina was a lucky girl to have such a precious flower, one that usually wilted as soon as it rained. But in Alona's garden, this plant had managed to survive, almost as if it had been waiting for Lorena. However, the weather wasn't cooperating. The rain that had started yesterday still poured down, and Lorena feared she might already be too late. The plant was starting to wither, its magical glow fading before her eyes. Desperation filled her heart. She blamed herself. It was her fault. She needed to focus to save the flower. Tears streamed down her face, but she refused to give in to her sorrow. There was no time for tears now. Taking a deep breath, Lorena gathered her strength and quickly plucked the flower from the ground. She wasn't going to give up. She wouldn't leave Elon behind. She swore to herself that she would help him at any cost. With urgency in her steps, Lorena rushed to the kitchen, banging the dishes in frustration. She had no time left. The decoction had to be made immediately while the flour was still fresh. There was no time to light a fire, and the cook had already left for the day. There was no one to help her, and the only fire burning in the house was in the Duke's private chambers. Lorena barged in, apologizing mentally, but she had no choice. She needed the fire. The urgency of the situation overwhelmed her. She quickly placed a suitable vessel over the flames and added the plant petals, praying it would work. She had no idea if she was doing it right. She should have studied it more carefully. Lorena had wasted too much time relying on others, but now she had no choice but to act. Lorena closed herself off, unable to stop the quiet tears streaming down her face. She couldn't bear the thought of letting Elon down. He didn't deserve it. She felt her heart breaking as she sat, unsure of how to fix what seemed broken. Elon approached her, but Lorena didn't want to explain anything to him. She felt sorry for disturbing his sleep, but there was no time to waste. She needed to make the decoction from the flour, and everything felt like it was slipping through her fingers. She couldn't afford to fail. She was scared, afraid that she had ruined everything. But there was no point in blaming herself for things she couldn't change, and she still didn't know if it would even work. Elon shouldn't risk drinking something that wasn't certain. She couldn't let her efforts go to waste. Lorena wasn't even sure if she had prepared the decoction correctly, but it was her duty as his servant to try. The least she could do was pour him the brew she had made. Her hands shook as she held the vessel, fear gripping her chest. The brew looked terrible, and she was sure it would taste worse. But Elon, undeterred, drank it all at once, showing no hesitation. It was typical of him. Despite the uncertainty, despite the risks, he was willing to trust her. He smiled broadly at her. It was enough for him that Lorena tried so hard for him. Lorena's heart sank, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. For this young man, she would turn the world upside down to find a cure. She was sure there was a better medicine out there, and she would find it. Meanwhile, in the imperial palace, the crown prince threw a glass of wine at the wall. After downing several bottles, he started throwing furniture around in his rage. That damn beast. A smug grin never left Elon's face, even though he was blind. He was still better than Xavier, and he was happier. How dare he be so happy? It drove Xavier mad. Elon, even without sight, had something that Xavier could never have. The heir to the throne couldn't bear it. Elon's eyes, his scarlet eyes, continued to torment Xavier. Xavier had always liked blue eyes, the color of the sky, because it symbolized power. But Elon's eyes, the true eyes of a god, reminded everyone that he was the one chosen. Xavier could never be what Elon was, and that thought burned in his gut. Despite being the Emperor's son, Xavier was considered weak, unworthy in the eyes of the gods. Xavier was unworthy of being a crown prince without the scarlet eyes that symbolized the true descendants of Odor. For the first time, a descendant of Odor had been born in the collateral line, which shook Xavier's very world. How could this happen? He was not deserving of Odor's recognition. The birth of Elon Clavan, the child who inherited the eyes of a god, had changed everything. Xavier's reign as the crown prince was questioned, and the court nobility demanded that the emperor adopt Elon as his successor. Elon was the strongest of all generations, and they knew they had to protect the empire's greatness. Everyone knew that Xavier was cowardly and corrupted, and his position was becoming increasingly irrelevant. The legend of the true heir to the throne, the one with the scarlet eyes, was too powerful to ignore. Xavier, unable to accept this, called for the guard, signaling that Elon's fate must be sealed. Elon, who was blind but still better than him, had a lover, and Xavier wanted to know everything about her. He would strip the beast of everything, trampling him into an irreversible fate from which he would never escape. That night, as the crown prince brooded, a roar echoed from the estate. Elon had woken up, overcome by hellish pain. His eyes, the scarlet ones that defined his bloodline, were burning. Blood streamed from his eye sockets, and the agony was unbearable. Elon cried out in pain, and the servants rushed into the room, alarmed. Bernard, terrified, rushed to his side, asking what had happened. Elon could barely speak through the pain, muttering about how much it hurt. The servants scrambled to find the painkillers. If something happened to Elon, especially if it was her fault, Lorena knew she wouldn't survive. The maid rushed to bring the medicine as quickly as she could. This was the first time Elon had experienced such excruciating pain. Bernard carefully covered him with a blanket, and Elon took a sleeping pill along with the painkiller. At least he would be able to rest for a while and regain his strength. The maid and Lorena needed to talk. It was clear that the maid must have been terrified for the master. Bernard, though, wasn't afraid. He had seen this many times before, but for Lorena it was something entirely new. Everything had started before Lorena began working here. Every time they tried to treat Elon, he went through unimaginable pain which had earned him the nickname, the Howling Beast. They tried countless methods to restore Elon's sight, but each time he screamed in agony as though he were enduring hell itself. The pain was so severe that he even attempted to gouge out his own eyes. From that moment on, he was known as the Blind Beast. No medicine had worked, and by the time Lorena arrived, Elon had already lost all hope. He knew the consequences, that he would suffer unbearable pain, but despite that, he drank the potion for her sake. Now, Elon endured all of this endless agony because of her. He trusted Lorena so much that he drank the potion without even questioning what it was. Lorena shouldn't blame herself. After all, she had tried everything for his sake. But as she clenched her fists, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was all her fault. She hadn't studied the issue properly. She wasn't even sure if she had made the decoction correctly. How could she have risked Elon's life and health like this? Lorena was consumed by guilt. She had given their master something she knew little about, something she was sure they hadn't tried before, but she couldn't even remember its name. She felt completely irresponsible. Bernard saw this all too clearly. He understood her care for the master, but now it seemed as though it was just a pretense, a way to gain Elon's trust while putting him in harm's way. But Lorena would never do that. Everything would be decided once Elon regained consciousness. The master would decide Lorena's fate, and she was prepared for that. For now, though, it was best for her to stay away from him. Bernard would look after Elon, and Lorena would have to wait for his decision. The maid felt ashamed of herself. She had caused Elon so much pain. Elon had been poisoned so many times, and this time it looked just the same. Perhaps he had suffered even more, not just because of her decoction, but because of everything that had led to this point. Lorena felt terrible as she wandered aimlessly, torturing herself with doubts. By habit, she found herself standing outside Elon's chambers. She knew she needed to apologize for everything, but she also needed to see him. The guilt weighed heavily on her heart. Bernard, who was watching over the master, noticed Lorena's presence. He asked what she was doing outside his lordship's door. Lorena was clearly in distress, though she didn't want to admit it. Bernard, understanding the situation, couldn't blame her for staying outside. However, it was still suspicious, and it seemed best that she stay away for now. Bernard thought it was wise to keep her distance, and in his place, Lorena would have made the same decision. She hated seeing Elon suffer like this, and the thought of him enduring so much pain hurt her deeply. But at the same time, she could not bring herself to leave him. She couldn't help but wonder if she had caused all of this suffering, and the guilt overwhelmed her. But deep down, Lorena knew she hadn't caused the pain. It was a result of everything else, but she couldn't escape the feeling that it was her fault. Elon had hoped she would run away, but Lorena hadn't. She had stayed, and that was her choice. But what had driven Elon to make his own choice to believe in her? Perhaps it was because everyone else had given up, but she couldn't. She couldn't leave Elon, and she didn't want him to believe that she would abandon him. If she could somehow take his place and find the cure, Lorena would do anything. She would take all his pain away and make his life happy again. If, after the decoction, Elon regained his sight, she would become the mistress of the estate. But that was all nonsense. She didn't want that role. What mattered was that Elon was still suffering, and she wouldn't bother him anymore. He needed rest. Lorena was awestruck by the strength Elon still had, despite the agony he was in. Even through such pain, he had managed to smile. For the first time since his sight was taken from him, Elon seemed to have hope. In the quiet of the morning, a scream echoed through the Earl of Harrington's estate. Lorena immediately panicked, but the maid reassured her. Miss Karina was fine, but she didn't look well. The maid was concerned about the Crown Prince, who had been too busy that day to even send Karina a note. It seemed that Xavier had been avoiding her for the 4th day in a row. Lorena's heart sank. How could he do that to Karina? Karina was supposed to be his true love. After spending the night together, Xavier was now ignoring her. Lorena tried to convince herself that Karina was just imagining things, but deep down she knew it was true. The maid's voice was cold, almost like steel, as she confirmed that Karina had gone to the Imperial Palace, specifically to the Crystal Palace, to the Crown Prince's chambers. The Duke's palace was not well staffed, and it was difficult to keep track of Sir Elon since he rarely left the estate. But why did the heir to the throne feel the need to question the failure of the guards? He called this an investigation. Lorena's identity remained a mystery. She had been hired through an agency and had no record of where she had worked before. The spies were instructed to continue their work. The maid's mysterious background raised suspicions. With no documents, she could be anyone. A dark horse, a criminal, a prisoner of war, or perhaps even a runaway gypsy. The girl was an enigma, and this said a lot about Elon's tastes. Was she a servant, or was she most likely a concubine? It was said that she was flirting with Elon, a man who had never shown interest in women, which led some to believe she was an experienced seductress. The Crown Prince's curiosity grew, and he changed his mind about the surveillance. He ordered the guards to bring the maid to him personally. He wanted to see what she would do once his favorite toy was taken from him. There was a knock at the door of Xavier's private chambers. The butler entered and mentioned that Miss Karina was requesting an audience. Xavier had no recollection of her face and could barely remember her name. He felt irritated and ordered the butler to reject her request, citing a personal order from his lordship. The butler left, and Xavier turned his attention to a portrait on the floor. The description of the girl in the painting seemed strangely familiar. She had long blonde hair, ivory skin, and violet eyes. Those features were all too recognizable. Xavier's eyes gleamed manically as he began to remember. Meanwhile, Elon's condition was worsening. The young man had been enduring excruciating pain for more than 6 days now, a never-before-seen suffering that had not stopped, unlike the usual painful attacks that ceased within 2 or 3 days. This was a new and terrifying experience for Elon, and all of it was because Lorena had brewed the potion. The young maid was deeply frustrated with herself. She had brewed the healing decoction incorrectly, and now she feared Elon's pain would never end. If Karina had made it, Elon would have already been on the road to recovery. But now, the master had only one request for her. Elon had asked her to get the chocolate from the Cardinal's cafe. Lorena immediately recalled the time when they had visited together, and now he wanted it again. Bernard trusted her, and she promised to run off and bring him the chocolate right away. With determination, Lorena clenched her fists, thumping her chest in a warrior-like gesture, and rushed out. But then she stopped, hesitated, and turned back. She had to tell Elon to be patient just a little longer. She would be back very soon. Bernard, who was watching, could only admire her. He knew Lorena was like a soldier on an important mission, but in reality, Elon had simply sent her away so he wouldn't have to endure the sight of his suffering. She hurried out, desperately needing to get that special chocolate. There were a lot of orders today, and she couldn't waste any time. As she made her way toward the main square, she was stopped by someone who grabbed her hand. Lorena spun around in shock, wondering if this person was trying to sell her again. But to her surprise, the person grabbing her hand wasn't a scary thug. It was a red-haired woman in a white robe, hiding her face under a hood. Lorena's heart raced. Who was this woman, and why was she grabbing her? Was she familiar with the real Lena, the former owner of her body? The stranger pulled back her hood, revealing her face, and Lorena froze. She couldn't believe it. It was Iris, but Lorena didn't recognize her, not like this, and she was still holding her hand. How did Iris know her? Iris was here to warn Lorena that she was in trouble. The maid had only gone out to get a bar of chocolate, but now everything seemed to have gone wrong. But as Lorena tried to figure out what to do, 2 more figures in white robes approached them in the main square. They looked like sectarians or something. What did they want from Lorena? She had nothing to offer. She was just a simple servant. Why were they looking at her that way? Lorena couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that washed over her. Was it really Lady Alicia standing before them? The servants around her were confused. Who was this woman really? The Hadua Sanctuary, located in the capital, was known as the sacred place where priests were trained to hear the voice of God according to the teachings of the Hada Temple. It was a revered institution. Only those who could hear the divine voice were allowed to become true priests. Money, power, or status couldn't get you into this sacred position, only blessings. Then came a candidate for the highest position. Alicia Uther was the one. She was the true jewel of the Uther noble family. At just 3 years old, Alicia had entered the temple and was already leading 100 believers in services. Her beauty was renowned, but it was her virtues that were truly valued. She was considered almost saintly, and all those who listened to her prayers repented and became devoted followers. But now, Lorena couldn't help but feel like something was terribly wrong. The priests in front of her seemed to think she was Alicia, but she was not. She was not the leader of the temple or a saint. She was just Lorena, a simple maid with no divine calling. The temple was beautiful, but these priests had clearly made a mistake. Lorena was not Alicia. Confused, Lorena started to feel the weight of the situation. Why did everyone think she was this Alicia? She had no idea. It felt like her head was spinning, as if some strange force had taken over her. It wasn't just static electricity, it was something else. Maybe it was all just her imagination, stress from the overwhelming situation. She didn't know. Iris, however, seemed certain. She clenched her fists, resigned. Alicia had nothing to worry about anymore, and Iris wasn't about to let anyone get in the way of that. The red-haired servant gently took Lorena's hand, leading her away from the crowd. Lorena had promised herself she would help Iris regain her lost memories, but Elon was growing increasingly impatient, tired of waiting for the chocolate. She had to hurry back. The conversation between the two girls was abruptly interrupted by the sound of clicking heels approaching. As Lorena turned, she saw a middle-aged woman standing before her. The woman had violet eyes just like hers, and she looked so much like Lorena that it made her heart skip a beat. The woman's eyes welled up with tears. She had prayed for this moment for so long. She had lost all hope of ever seeing her daughter again, but now, standing before her, was Alicia, alive and well. The woman wrapped Lorena in a tight embrace, overwhelmed with emotion. She had believed she had lost her child forever, and now here she was, finally in her arms. However, there was something unsettling about the situation. Alicia didn't seem to remember her mother. The woman's heart ached as she realized that Alicia had lost her memory. Could it be true that Lorena had ended up in the body of Alicia? The woman's violet eyes reflected a mix of pain and relief. She had been praying for this day, yet she was conflicted. Lorena, or Alicia, was now the owner of this body, and her past was a mystery to her. If she couldn't return to her original world, perhaps it would be better to have family here. Lorena, still focused on her duties, apologized. She was in a rush to finish what she had to do and get back to Elon. He needed her desperately. She wondered if the temple priest could prove that she was Alicia. It felt crucial, for it would determine her future and her place in this world. As Lorena's thoughts raced, the sun's rays began to pour into the protagonist's bedroom, casting long shadows across the room. Elon, in terrible pain, let out a muffled roar. This time, the pain was so severe, so unbearable, that he feared he might die from it. Elon had never experienced such excruciating agony before. He had taken the medication, but it seemed to do little to ease his suffering. Perhaps it was because he truly believed in the power of the decoction Lorena had given him. Bernard, the ever-faithful manager, entered the room with concern in his eyes. He asked how his young master was feeling. Elon's pain had eased slightly, but he was incredibly thirsty. This was unlike any pain he had felt before, even after taking medicine. It was clear that Elon's suffering had taken a toll on him. The manager handed Elon a cup of tea, thoughtfully considering the situation, but the question still lingered: where was Lorena now? Elon sighed deeply, realizing that the girl still hadn't returned to the estate. Bernard bit his lip nervously, feeling the weight of disappointing his master. It hurt him to see his lord in such agony, waiting for Lorena's return. He knew it was likely that Lorena was deliberately staying away longer. It must be difficult for her to listen to the beast's painful screams all day long. Bernard quickly made a decision, ordering 3 men to go to the cafe. If Lorena wasn't there, they were to search the surrounding area. He hoped to find her soon. In the meantime, he decided to clean up the room a bit. Elon, though, didn't notice the manager's activity. Once again, he was swallowed by the suffocating loneliness that gripped him. He felt as though he was drowning, trapped in darkness, with no light or escape in sight. His soft bed, once a refuge from the outside world, now felt like a prison. He writhed in pain, the blindness and the endless solitude tearing him apart. The greatest warrior of the empire, once indifferent to concern or pity, now found himself desperately yearning for someone's care. But at the same time, he didn't want Lorena to see his suffering. He didn't want her to witness his pain. He had never imagined that he would need someone so much. He just wanted her to come back, to return to him soon. Meanwhile, Lorena wandered the vast temple, accompanied by her new companions from her character's past. The temple was enormous, majestic, yet everything seemed overrun with bindweed. Lorena felt lost in this unfamiliar place. She had no recollection of what had happened before. Her memories were fragmented, and all she could do was follow Iris and try to piece together the truth of her past. Iris led her forward, explaining little by little. The red-haired temple attendant then held up a mirror and asked Lorena to remove her clothes. Lorena was taken aback. She had known Iris for less than a day, and already this strange request was being made. Iris sighed impatiently and began pulling off Lorena's clothes herself, insisting it was necessary to examine her back. Lorena didn't understand what was going on, but the attendant seemed insistent. Finally, the woman exposed Lorena's shoulder blade, revealing a strange mark. Iris, her face tense, explained it wasn't a tattoo. The woman's voice grew urgent as she continued, taking off her robe and exposing her own shoulder. Lorena's confusion deepened as she tried to make sense of it all. Iris examined the back of her new acquaintance with growing interest. The mark was unmistakable, a special scar, a priestly sign, a divine recognition. This scar, which appeared in a certain spot on the back, was like a birthmark and signified that the person had undergone the initiation ceremony chosen by a god. After the ceremony, the scar would appear as a symbol of the priest's divine connection. Lorena had no idea that her character's original owner, Alicia, had such a mark. The girl had taken over Alicia's body a year ago, but was only now discovering details about its past owner. She had been so focused on helping Elon that she never really explored her own history. As Lorena pieced together the information, it became clear Alicia was indeed the woman everyone talked about in the temple, which could only mean one thing: the real Alicia had died and Lorena had assumed her body. Lorena's heart sank with the realization she wasn't Alicia, and she had no connection to the divine voice that supposedly guided true priests. She had no special connection to God like Iris did, who could hear his voice and had passed the tests of the Hadu temple. But Lorena was different. She didn't hear anything, didn't feel any divine calling. She wasn't the great Alicia. Iris, too, was a priestess, a person chosen by God. She wouldn't have been able to enter the Hadu temple otherwise. But Lorena was just a girl. She wasn't special, not like Alicia. Why had she lost her memories, and how did she end up by the riverbank? An elderly couple had found her, nursed her back to health, and now Lorena was struggling to understand everything. The riverbank. It seemed to fit the tragic backstory of Alicia, but something didn't sit right. Alicia's body had disappeared, presumed dead after a brutal attack on her crew and escort. The attackers had shown no mercy, killing everyone on the spot in what appeared to be a targeted assassination attempt. Lorena couldn't remember any of that. She hadn't read the novels or heard of such a tale before. She was caught in a romance novel, and yet she didn't even know the plot. Was she really Alicia, or was she just someone else entirely? The facts didn't add up. The lake where Alicia had been found was a week's ride from the temple, passing through dangerous territories. And judging by the dates, Lorena had taken over Alicia's body around the time she disappeared, which meant maybe she wasn't Alicia at all, but then how could she deny the mark? She had seen it herself. Lorena took a moment to absorb all the information. She had enough for now, and she didn't want to worry Elon further. She needed to return to the estate. There was no time to dwell on these questions. Meanwhile, Alicia's mother, deeply distressed, looked at the girl, her eyes filled with sorrow. She had searched for her daughter across the empire, but after so long, no trace of her had been found. The last anyone knew, Alicia had drowned in a mountain lake. And now, here was this young woman in front of her. Was she truly Alicia? The woman insisted that Lorena's true home was here, in the estate of Duke Claven. It was her destiny and duty to stay. No matter how many times it was said, Lorena would never abandon Elon. She understood what it meant for her, but it didn't matter. She was committed to staying by his side. Lorena's mother squeezed her shoulders tightly, clearly trying to make her understand. She couldn't go back to the mansion. Meanwhile, it was already late into the night in the Empire. The manager was setting up dinner in the kitchen, deeply concerned about his master. Elon's pain hadn't stopped, and while it subsided for short periods, it never lasted long enough to give him real rest. No matter how strong Elon was, if this agony didn't end, it would drive him mad. Bernard had seen a lot in his time, but even he was scared for his master. The roar of pain from Elon suddenly stopped, signaling that another attack had passed. Bernard rushed to the master's side, but Lorena still hadn't returned. He had searched everywhere and couldn't find her. She was supposed to be at the cafe, but where had she gone? He couldn't help but feel guilty. Then, unexpectedly, he heard the unmistakable sound of Elon speaking. Bernard looked up and his heart stopped. His master's scarlet eyes, the eyes of Odor, shone again. Elon could see. The greatest warrior of the Empire, the descendant of a god, had regained his sight. Lorena had saved him. In shock, Bernard collapsed to the floor. Could it really be? Elon could see again. Elon struggled to sit up, his movements slow and shaky. It was clear that after all the suffering, he was still weak, but he was determined. Bernard rushed to help him, but Elon was insistent, though his body barely allowed it. Bernard's voice trembled with joy. He had served such a great person, a person who had suffered so much and still fought to stand. He had always been by his side, loyal, and now he was overwhelmed with happiness to see his master recover. A tear slipped down Bernard's cheek, touched by the sight of Elon trying to stand once more. The man who had been bedridden for so long, now slowly standing on his own again, was an incredible sight. Elon, despite his struggles, showed how far he had come. Elon tried to stand without relying on his cane. He needed to get used to moving on his own again, and the thought filled him with happiness. Bernard had always believed that Elon's sight would return. He was the most worthy and brilliant of Odor's descendants. However, Bernard couldn't help but wonder where Lorena was. It was already night, and she still hadn't returned to the estate. Where could she be? Meanwhile, the church had heard the news. The archbishop had returned, but hadn't he gone to Grossa? It had been announced to everyone that he was staying there to investigate the disappearance of Alicia. The temple servant stared at his interlocutor, shocked. Clearly, he had no idea what was going on. Lady Alicia had returned to their temple just the day before. She had been found in the main square of the capital, near a local cafe. Iris was eager to introduce Alicia to their archbishop, a man named Sir Alejandro. The archbishop had a strong, determined presence. His silver hair and dark eyes gave him an aura of power. Even Lorena could feel the strength of his presence. She was pleased to meet him, but she noticed that the archbishop's face was not as welcoming. It seemed that Alicia had some sort of issue with Alejandro. Why was he looking at her like that? Had she refused him or perhaps offended him in some way? The archbishop greeted Alicia with a blessing, saying, "May the blessing of the 5 gods of Odor be upon you, young miss." Alicia immediately bowed in response and returned the greeting. May the blessing of the 5 gods of Odor be upon the archbishop. But the fact that Alicia didn't even remember the formal greeting was troubling. It was clear that so many memories had vanished from her mind. She didn't even remember her own name. The archbishop studied her carefully. "What happened to your hair?" he asked, noticing that it seemed to have been cut off. Lorena was confused, unable to make sense of what was going on. Iris quickly explained that all priests bleach the ends of their hair to reflect their dedication to becoming the voice of God. Alicia's hair had been bleached too, but her strands now seemed different, like something had gone wrong. Even after losing her memory, Alicia no longer heard the voice of God. She had the mark, but no divine guidance. Perhaps Alicia remembered the first secret phrase she had heard, the one needed to become a priestess of the temple, but she didn't know what it was. The archbishop's mood darkened, his expression becoming as stormy as a thundercloud. "What should we do with her?" he muttered, clearly frustrated and uncertain. The archbishop was at a loss. Alicia couldn't hear the voice of God. She didn't remember the secret words that were supposed to be ingrained in her from the beginning, the words that would have made her a priestess. Without them, she couldn't fulfill her calling. How could this happen? Alicia was meant to become the next archbishop. It was her destiny. But it seemed that the gods had abandoned her. Despite all that, Alicia still bore the sacred mark, so it seemed the gods hadn't fully forsaken her. However, the archbishop's decision was clear. Alicia would be excommunicated from the temple. This was the final word. Alicia's mother couldn't believe it. She begged the archbishop to show mercy, to allow her daughter to stay in the temple. But the archbishop wasn't moved. He made it clear that Alicia's fate was sealed, and if she couldn't regain her memory and hear the voice of God, she would have to leave. The Duchess had a lot of faith in her daughter's future, and she wasn't ready to give up on Alicia just yet. The mother pleaded that if Alicia could regain her memory, the excommunication should be revoked. She insisted that her daughter was still young, only 20 years old, and there were still plenty of paths left for her. But the archbishop remained firm. He stated that the decision was out of his hands. The gods of Odor would determine Alicia's fate. For now, Alicia would be excommunicated, and she would have to leave the temple. Despite this, Alicia had already planned to leave the temple herself, so this scene felt unnecessary. Lorena, unsure of how to help, stood by. She knew the situation wasn't her fault, but it was still difficult to witness. Watching the Duchess, Lorena realized how hard it must be for parents when their children can't seem to move forward. The mother was devastated that Alicia didn't remember anything, but she still had so much hope for her. Lorena gently assured her that although Alicia didn't remember, she would still live a happy life. It was the most important thing for any parent. Everyone had their own path to follow. Alicia would work hard and make up for the lost time. There was no reason for her mother to be sad. Lorena suggested that the Duchess should begin teaching her daughter as she was capable and would quickly catch up. Overcome with emotion, the Duchess immediately rushed to embrace the girl. The scene was heavy with sentiment. It seemed as though the sweet daughter was trying so hard to please her mother, but she couldn't remember anything, not even her mother's face. The Duchess would surely figure something out, Lorena thought, as she gently placed her hand on the Duchess's shoulder, offering some comfort. She felt a wave of emotion rise up in her and nearly burst into tears herself. Meanwhile, in the bustling main square, a young man of exceptional beauty and strength sat at a table in the Cardinal Café. A clumsy waitress, startled by her own mistake, dropped a cup of hot tea and hurriedly rushed to clean up the mess. The waitress, embarrassed, was apologizing profusely while the young man, looking calm and composed, reassured her. He then turned his gaze to the people around him. He looked around, realizing that Lorena was nowhere to be found. A large group of curious ladies had gathered, whispering and wondering who this handsome young man could be. The noise around him felt different from the last time he'd been here. Elon observed the surroundings, noting how everything was a bit more worn out than he remembered. The tables were old, and the windows had faded, long unwashed curtains. Lorena had clearly exaggerated the appearance of the place when she described it to him. This cafe wasn't as charming as she had painted it. He entered the cafe and saw the same young man who had sold chocolate to Lorena just 3 days ago. Elon asked if the young man remembered a girl who had ordered their signature chocolate on that day. The chocolate was quite popular, and many people bought it as a gift, so it was hard to keep track of everyone. The young man had not seen the girl in person, but recalled that Lorena had described her dark skin, red hair, and blue eyes. Lorena also mentioned that she had unusual facial features. Elon was sure that such a striking girl wouldn't be easily forgotten. But despite the description, the young man couldn't recall anyone fitting that appearance. He apologized, saying he just couldn't remember. Elon had hoped for more, but it seemed that the Duke had arrived too late. Finding this girl was proving difficult. Bernard, always the loyal manager, pleaded with his master to rest. Elon's eyes were still recovering, and yet he was determined to continue searching. Bernard sighed, realizing that no matter how hard he tried, Elon would keep pushing forward. The young man was still unaware of Lorena's whereabouts. Elon, determined, decided to take matters into his own hands. Bernard, ever the concerned manager, pleaded with Elon to stop and prioritize his health. Elon had been blind for 2.5 years, and his eyes had long become unaccustomed to light. If he overexerted himself, it could cause irreparable damage. Bernard's words made sense. Elon didn't want to hurt Lorena or make her suffer. But the time they had been apart was unbearable, and Elon couldn't shake the worry. Where could she be? Cedric was then instructed to send a messenger to Duke Claven as per his master's command. The faithful knight, Cedric, was ready to carry out Elon's orders, even if it meant staying awake for 2 straight days. Cedric was simply overjoyed that his lord had regained his sight and was eager to serve such a noble man. After knocking on a door, a man appeared. They had clearly come to the right place. They needed a group of mercenaries who specialized in finding missing people. Cedric sent 2 young men inside to begin their search. Elon, following closely behind, descended the stairs. He had to find her. Inside, the room was noisy and crowded, with men drinking wine and telling crude jokes. Elon was scanning the room, searching for any signs of the girl he had been desperate to find. He heard the offer from the mercenary group. If the person they were searching for was in the capital, the fee would be 100 gold. The price would rise depending on the location of the person. Elon threw a heavy bag of money onto the bar counter, the clink of 1,000 gold coins echoing in the room. The man behind the counter was speechless. That amount of money should be more than enough to cover the expenses for the search. Elon explained that he was looking for a girl named Lorena. She was 27 years old, with red hair, blue eyes, and shoulder-length hair. The man behind the counter immediately pointed out that, for such a sum, they were dealing with a runaway wife, but Elon quickly corrected him. Lorena was not his wife. This was good news for the mercenaries, as they were not obligated to forcibly drag anyone who didn't wish to be found. Elon and Cedric then stepped back out onto the busy street. Cedric, ever attentive, listened as Elon issued one more task. There weren't many people living in the capital, and Lorena couldn't have simply vanished. Someone must have seen her. Meanwhile, in the Crown Prince's private chambers, the sounds of shattered dishes and a furious outburst could once again be heard. The Crown Prince, furious and incredulous, found himself caught up in a situation that seemed utterly nonsensical. The girl disappeared right in front of the Imperial Guards. The confusion was palpable. Was she some sort of ninja? Lorena barely left the estate, yet their scout had searched the entire servants' quarters and found no trace of her. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. The officers were furious, calling the situation a complete failure. They wondered if she had somehow made it into Elon's private chambers, but Lorena had never been in the chambers of Lord Claven. The question still lingered, why hadn't Elon shared a bed with the servant? Elon had been clear, Lorena was just a servant and they hadn't spent the night together. But why had he bought her so many outfits? What was the meaning behind it? The beast-like rage in Xavier's eyes was evident. He had made it clear to everyone that no one was allowed to touch his woman, and now this situation was only making him more agitated. The Crown Prince wanted Lorena, and he would stop at nothing to get her, even if it meant the cost of their lives. Meanwhile, at the Uther mansion, where Alicia had once lived, Lorena was adjusting to her new life. Duke Uther rose from the table and greeted his daughter warmly. He asked how she had slept in her old bedroom, and Alicia, happy to see her father, responded that she had slept well. Her father, a man of few words, always slept soundly. He insisted she start eating before the food got cold. It had been 3 days since Lorena arrived at the mansion, and she had already been made to feel at home. The Uther family had shown her nothing but kindness, and the servants were thrilled by Alicia's return. Lorena, stunned by the warmth of the welcome, felt a sense of comfort in the estate. It was bright, cozy, and the food was exceptional. She liked it there. What surprised her most was that, apart from the Duchess, no one seemed to be bothered by her excommunication from the Hada temple. It seemed to mean little to anyone except the Duchess. The rest of the family was just happy to see her alive and well. Lorena began to wonder if the real Alicia had ended up serving in the temple due to the will of her mother, the Duchess. She was reminded that she had no time to waste. The Duchess had already arranged for the necessary teachers to begin training Alicia. There was much to be done, and time was running out. It was not the time for Alicia to be idle. Melia, the Duchess, wanted her daughter to get back to work and focus on her duties. There was no time to waste. Alicia had to come to her senses and start learning. If Alicia wanted to get involved in society, it was already too late to delay her education. The Duchess insisted that Alicia begin with etiquette and the history of the Empire, as she had promised to study hard. But why push her so much? The Duchess insisted that after Alicia finished her meal, she should immediately start with her teachers. Alicia obediently lowered her head, resigned to the situation. She had hoped that by taking a break from all the work, she could escape the never-ending studying. But things had only gotten worse. Melia was a tyrant, and Alicia felt trapped. She had already been through so much stress that it had caused her to lose her memory. But instead of receiving love and understanding from her mother, she was handed a stack of textbooks. What kind of mother was she? Then, Alicia was called by a maid named Lori, who had some important news. Lori had managed to find out what her mistress had been asking about, and she quickly shared the information. It was true, Elon, the greatest warrior of the Empire and a descendant of Oder, had regained his sight. Alicia was overjoyed at the news. Tears filled her eyes as her heart raced. Elon was getting better, and soon he would be able to return to society and politics. They had even started recruiting new servants for the estate. Lori's friend wanted to transfer to the estate, but Alicia was curious, how did Lori know so much about the Duke, considering she had always lived in the Hada temple? Was it possible that the lady could hear the voice of the gods again? Perhaps the gods had decided her new fate. Lori smiled, happy for her mistress. She said it was a long and strange story, one not for the faint-hearted, but she couldn't help but admire how beautiful Alicia looked even with tears in her eyes. There was a lot to do, but Lori was happy to serve Alicia. She had become Alicia's maid, and it was time to get ready for her lessons. Lori was happy to assist whenever needed, but for now, she was going to let Alicia have a moment of peace. It felt like the long-awaited quiet had finally arrived. Alicia had never been so tired before, even with all the work for Elon. The relief in her heart was palpable. She was so happy for Elon, knowing that he would soon be able to see again, to be happy again, and live a full life. But just as quickly as the peace came, Lorena herself had disappeared, without warning. Lorena hadn't even said goodbye or explained herself, and it felt like such a betrayal. But she had only been a guide to Elon, nothing more. She knew he wouldn't want to search for her, especially since she was just a servant who had witnessed his vulnerability. Still, Lorena couldn't help but wish she could see the handsome young man again, just one more time, to be near him. Of course, someone like him would never feel the same way about her. She wouldn't let herself dwell on empty hopes. Greed was clouding her mind. He was dear to her heart, but writing to him was out of the question. Lorena couldn't remind him of the time when he was blind, and she knew he wouldn't want to see her. She had promised to always be by his side, yet here she was, running away without any explanation. Even if they happened to meet again in the capital, Elon would never recognize her. He had no idea what she looked like. He probably thought she looked like the South Korean flag. She had to live as though Lorena never existed. The etiquette teacher had arrived and the hard labor began. This was probably for the best because Lorena wasn't supposed to exist in this world. If she wanted to see the end of the novel, she had to avoid its main characters. She was now Alicia Uther, and all her previous plans had failed, leaving her with no other ideas. There was only one person close to her soul, but that person no longer needed her. She was alone again. Meanwhile, Elon slammed the cup on the table. Where could he find that damn Lorena? She had asked to meet him here, and 3 days had passed with no sign of her. The place was so nondescript, and it wasn't even clear whether the fortune teller would show up. Still, Elon couldn't think of any other way to find her. What terrible luck. Karina had been so sure she would become the flower of the empire, convinced that a great future awaited her. She always thought of herself as special, as if happiness would just fall into her lap. But now, where was it? The crown prince, a dark-haired youth destined by fate, had used Karina and then forgotten all about her, moving on to his next passion. All the aristocrats valued the innocence of their brides, but Karina had fallen for Xavier's sweet words, and now she was left empty-handed. The Earl Incest Harrington had eagerly awaited a marriage proposal from the imperial family, but what had happened in the end? Lorena had been right all along. She needed to find that second man, whoever he was. Elon began to wonder if he should be the one to provide her with a happy life. But who was the fortune teller referring to? Who could possibly be the rival for the crown prince? The noise in the cafe was unbearable. It was a total dive. What was Lorena doing here in this filthy place? The whole environment was appalling, and the kitchen was even worse. But if Karina didn't meet Lorena here today, she would have to keep coming back again and again. The young man had noticed the lady in the hat a long time ago sitting alone. She wasn't even with anyone else, and Karina was sure that the girl was waiting for a friend. The young man didn't agree with her assumptions at all, so he decided to keep his thoughts to himself. Frustrated, Karina slammed her fist onto the table. It wasn't immediately clear to her that the man she was talking to was beneath her. He needed to leave, and fast. The tone in which she spoke to him was shocking. Was she completely unaware of who she was talking to? The young man, irritated by her attitude, grabbed her hand angrily, thinking she was asking for trouble. But the girl quickly pulled her hand away. She wasn't about to let this idiot touch her, especially when she could tell he was no match for her. This impudent fool was now in serious trouble. He was clearly from a lower class, and the crowd of onlookers immediately took notice. Silence fell over the scene as the tension built. Lorena walked confidently through the parted crowd, her voice firm as steel. Elon, noticing her, quickly released the girl and turned his attention to Karina. Karina was speechless, frozen in shock as her eyes met the young man's. He was undeniably handsome, with striking scarlet eyes and dark hair. She couldn't move, still stunned by the sight of him. What was this man doing here? Wasn't he just some scoundrel? The young man had simply wanted to offer Karina coffee, yet she had made such a scene. She had started it, cursing and acting worse than any local drunkard. He didn't care much for her pompous, empty attitude anyway. Realizing he wasn't interested in her, Karina ran off, humiliated, her retreat met by the mocking laughter of the crowd, and that was when the main characters met for the first time. Elon had saved Karina, just like in the original story. She was perfectly fine thanks to him. She couldn't help but admire how wonderful he was. At that very moment, she could feel the gears of fate shifting. Her betrothed, standing right in front of Karina, was the one Lorena had spoken of. This was the beginning of a new life, one where a new love awaited her. It was as if fate itself had already decided. The author of the novel had always written about a dark-haired man as the heroine's true love, and it was clear that this wasn't the vile Xavier. No, this was the man who fate had led her to. In that moment, the girl felt as though she had finally found where she truly belonged. Now, what would the main character say? What would be his first words to her? He would likely say it was an honor for Duke Claven to save such a beautiful lady. Karina was irresistible, and soon enough, the young man would want to walk her home. Afterward, the main character would undoubtedly kiss her, unable to hold back his feelings even though she had fallen for someone else. Despite her past, she would never let this handsome young man slip away. But something was off. The main character paused. How had he just left? He had been struck by her beauty, and yet he simply took off. Wasn't there a spark between them? Why did he rush away so suddenly? What happened to Karina's happy future? The young man didn't seem to be listening to Karina's thoughts or her desires. Elon continued on his path, determined. In his mind and heart, there was only one girl, Lorena. Meanwhile, Alicia felt an odd sensation, as though someone was speaking about her. Bernard seemed to have harsh words for her, possibly about her escape or the potion. The garden of Duchess Uther was beautiful and vast. Mrs. Melia took care of it personally. Was it true that she handled everything by herself? Indeed, this place symbolized love, for Duke Uther had planted it especially for his wife years ago. It was a gesture of romance, showing their almost perfect relationship. The music hall was nearby, and the Duchess spent much of her time there. Sitting at a table surrounded by silent, majestic statues, Duchess Melia appeared deep in thought, sighing heavily. Laurie would wait for her lady here. Something seemed off with the Duchess today. Maybe something had happened. The silence in the room was broken by Alicia's voice asking why her mother had called for her. The Duchess had been waiting for her a long time. Alicia finally sat down, but she was far from her mother. The Duchess wanted her to come closer, urging her to sit beside her. Clearly, the conversation was going to focus again on Alicia's departure from the temple. Nothing else seemed to trouble Melia more than that. The Duchess wanted to mention how the Empress had been asking to meet her daughter. The news stirred emotions in the Duchess, but why? Was it because of her daughter's manners? If she didn't improve them, Melia might forget about making any arrangements. Alicia didn't want to bring shame to her family, but she was at her breaking point with the endless etiquette lessons. The corset she was forced to wear was so tight that she could hardly breathe, making it feel like she was suffocating. She jokingly thought it should be buried in the garden, wondering why women had to endure such things. Maybe she should push for political change to fight for women's rights. It was hard for her mother to say it aloud, but apparently this was her fate and there was no escaping it. Then the Duchess started talking about something else, almost as if she hadn't spoken aloud at all. She mentioned that the Empress had sent an invitation requesting a visit in 5 days. Alicia couldn't understand why there was such a rush. In just 5 days, how could they possibly turn a simple poodle into a noble racehorse? From what the Duchess said, it seemed that the Empress had learned that Alicia was no longer in Hushi, and the Empress liked her very much. That seemed like good news, but if that was true, why did the Duchess look so worried, pale even? Something didn't feel right. Alicia thought she must have misunderstood. The Empress, who had already heard about Alicia's situation, wanted to make her the crown princess, but how? She had barely left the estate and was now embroiled in trouble again. Xavier was now with Princess Karina, and Alicia was completely confused about what was going on. Any mother would be happy with such news, but this was different. There was clearly something wrong. Alicia was unsure if she was fit to be the crown princess or if she even wanted to be a member of the imperial family. Her mother was more concerned about her excommunication from the temple, worried about the social implications. The Duchess wasn't like other aristocrats who would accept such marriage proposals just for political gain. She would never sacrifice her daughter's happiness for the sake of politics. The Duchess believed that life was meant to be a joy for those who wanted it, not a cage for those who didn't. The most important thing for the Duchess was what Alicia herself wanted. If Alicia truly felt ready to take on such a responsibility, they would discuss it with her father. But Alicia didn't even understand what it meant to be the wife of an aristocrat. Melia, on the other hand, was a sensitive woman who cared deeply for her daughter's happiness. Alicia didn't want to become the crown princess or marry Xavier, especially since she had lost her memory. She wanted to start fresh, figure out who she was, and then decide what she truly wanted out of life. Her mother's worries about her excommunication from the temple were understandable, but Alicia believed she would find her own path. Alicia knew that she would find her own path in life, and she wanted her mother to believe in that too. With a warm smile, she squeezed Duchess Uther's hands and reassured her that there was no need to worry. Her words of support seemed to warm the Duchess's heart, but Melia's concerns remained. They still had to find a suitable dress for Alicia, something the girl hadn't thought about at all. The last time Elon bought her dresses, it was right before that worm, Xavier, showed up. It wasn't appropriate to attend the imperial court in simple clothes, and finding something fitting in just 5 days was nearly impossible. Usually it took weeks to create a dress that suited the occasion. Despite this, Alicia remained confident. She had an idea and everything would be fine. She promised her mother not to worry. The next day, Elon visited the only ladies' boutique in the capital. Upon entering, the shopkeeper, Emily, greeted him warmly. She was thrilled to welcome him again, especially since a place like this would never allow commoners or maids inside. The boutique owner expressed her honor at hosting him, but Elon wasn't here for a casual visit. He was following up on an order which seemed to have been cancelled. Elon wanted to know when and by whom the order for Lorina's dresses had been cancelled. It turned out the order had been cancelled 10 days ago and the refund had already been processed. This confused him because he hadn't requested it. According to the shopkeeper, it was Lorina who had come in and personally cancelled the order, even asking for the return to be sent to the Duke's estate. Elon was puzzled. 10 days ago, Lorina was still at his estate, so why would she come here to cancel the dresses? Perhaps she thought he would ask for something in return, but Elon only wanted to give her a gift. Had he really burdened her so much that she felt the need to cancel the order? The boutique owner clarified that Duke Clavin would not be taking back the dresses as he had not requested the refund. Elon felt conflicted. He had hoped that regaining his sight would bring him some peace, but it only brought emptiness. He realized now that by gaining his sight he had lost Lorina. It felt like his world was teetering on the edge. The boutique owner sighed heavily as Elon left, clutching her chest in frustration. The entire situation seemed like a chaotic mess, and the inability to see or hear Lorina felt like unbearable torture to him. The atmosphere in the room became tense as Emily struggled to breathe. She was on the verge of saying something, but the oppressive gaze of the young man with scarlet eyes made her hesitate. His intense stare seemed to pierce right through her, a power that only the divine odor could bestow. Emily could feel the weight of that gaze, and for a moment she feared she might reveal too much. She couldn't help but feel sympathy for the mother and daughter, knowing how complicated their situation was. She had learned that Lorina, the missing girl, was actually Alicia, and all along the holy servant of the temple had been living as a mere servant at Clavin Estate. This revelation was unexpected, and the Duchess was fully aware of the implications. She had one request to make of Miss Emily. Duchess Uther wanted to purchase everything that Elon had ordered, but she insisted that Emily tell him that Lorina had cancelled the order herself just days ago. While this would undoubtedly harm the reputation of Emily's boutique, the Duchess was clear. If Alicia's past were to become public, her social standing could be ruined. With Alicia excommunicated from the temple, her future depended on her reputation, and the Duchess appealed to Emily to help her in this matter. Emily understood the delicate nature of the situation. She couldn't refuse the Duchess's request, especially given the look in Alicia's large, sad violet eyes. The girl seemed so pitiful, and Emily felt a deep sympathy for her. In return for helping them, Emily knew she wouldn't suffer any loss in business. This could also strengthen her ties with the Uther family, which was an opportunity she couldn't ignore. So, she agreed to assist them, but there was one condition: when Alicia eventually married, she would order her wedding dress from Emily's boutique. The Duchess agreed, and Emily quickly drafted up a pre-order form. Minutes later, she held the completed document in her hands, confirming that Alicia would indeed order her wedding dress from the boutique. Emily felt that she had acted hastily, but ultimately everything had fallen into place. The next step was to figure out how to create the perfect dress for the young lady, a task that now carried great significance. Emily, with her keen eye for design, was thrilled by the prospect of creating a wedding dress for such a beautiful lady. It was the perfect opportunity to showcase her talents. Alicia's approval meant everything, and Emily knew this large order would bring great prestige to her boutique. Meanwhile, in the private quarters of the Imperial Palace, the Empress was having a serious discussion with her son, the Crown Prince Xavier, who had been too busy with urgent matters to even attend his mother's summons. Despite her request, Xavier, who had grown tired of his responsibilities, remained distant. His refusal to come was like a knife to the Empress's heart. The Empress's thoughts were clouded with concern. Xavier, the heir to the throne, had a bad reputation. He was not seen as fit to rule. She thought it was high time he found a suitable wife, someone who could help him secure his place as a leader. But Xavier was dismissive of this idea, shaking his head. He felt too young to settle down and wasn't interested in the burden of marriage. The Empress couldn't understand how her son, destined to be the ruler, could be so careless. He was not distinguished by anything remarkable. Didn't he like Karina Harrington? The Empress knew Karina had even spent the night in the Crystal Palace, but Xavier seemed uninterested. The Empress urged her son to look beyond the Harringtons. The new nobility might be wealthy, but they lacked the status of the old aristocracy. Xavier was missing the key to the throne, the favor of the old aristocrats. He needed to be careful and strategic, but instead he was being reckless. The Empress, frustrated, wondered if this issue would ever resolve itself after Xavier's coronation. Her disappointment in her son was palpable. Xavier, in her eyes, was hopelessly foolish, and it was no surprise that the gods hadn't blessed him. He was the complete opposite of a true descendant of Odor, the god of wisdom and power. The Empress brought up Alicia Uther, a candidate for the next archbishop, and asked Xavier if he knew her. Xavier acknowledged that he did. Alicia had been excommunicated from the temple and had returned to her home. The Empress, who had been following Alicia's case closely, knew the girl had been hiding due to a terrible illness. Alicia had even lost her memory, though at least she was in good health now. The news that Alicia had lost her memory seemed to surprise Xavier. The girl, a vision of beauty and strength, reminded him of Elon Claven with her silver hair, violet eyes, and ivory skin. When Xavier first saw Alicia, he was speechless. Her stunning appearance had captivated him completely. It was as if she had stepped right out of an artist's canvas. The area where Alicia was headed was highly restricted, and a casual passerby couldn't enter. This left Xavier with no choice but to observe Alicia from a distance, unable to approach her. Meanwhile, in the Imperial Palace, everyone was discussing the incredible beauty of the Uther family. It was said that Alicia would be going to Gross for the weekend. This presented a unique opportunity for someone with ill intentions. All the priests were sent there for training, and soon a new chapter would unfold for Alicia. Lady Uther was expected to spend several years in Gross, and it was a shame that the Empire would not see her radiant face for so long. Everyone adored her. She had not only beauty, but also a kind heart and a pure soul. She was like a ray of sunshine. As the conversation between two maids continued, it was interrupted by the voice of the heir to the throne. Xavier had overheard everything and confirmed what they were saying. The maids, however, did not notice him standing there. They were talking about Alicia Uther, the future high priestess, who was soon leaving for Gross. Although the exact date of her departure was unknown, rumors had it that it would happen very soon. Xavier, the villain in this story, saw this as his chance to possess a woman of such beauty. He hired assassins to eliminate every single one of her escorts. But Alicia was not like the others. She was the only one who saw through his worthless charm and rejected him outright. The gods had rejected him as well, deeming him insignificant and cowardly. Alicia understood the situation she was in, knowing that Xavier, being a prince, would likely get away with it. There was nowhere for her to run. Xavier didn't like being forced, and though he had longed for Alicia, he wanted her to come to him willingly. Even when Alicia was angry or frightened, she remained the most beautiful woman in his eyes. Alicia, through gritted teeth, muttered that the Temple of Hushi would never forgive such actions, not even from a prince. She had taken a sacred vow to serve the gods. The vile prince grabbed Alicia by her hair, irritated by the white bleached locks she possessed. In a fit of rage, Xavier used his sword to cut off Alicia's hair, making her no longer resemble a Hushi temple attendant. Xavier, as the heir of Odor, had a certain power over her, but he was also just a man, one who was nothing but dirt in the eyes of both the gods and people. If Alicia was a good girl, she wouldn't feel pain, Xavier believed. There were no witnesses here, just the two of them. Xavier, filled with rage and disbelief, thought that someone might come to his aid after his cruel actions were revealed. But he was wrong. No one, not even his own mother, would stand by him if they knew the depths of his depravity. He was despised by everyone, even his own family, and deserved nothing but punishment. His threats and vile actions would amount to nothing. Alicia, trembling with fear, had been a weak target, but now it was over. The time had come to end his torment. The envious, insignificant rat had gone mad with power. In a desperate act, Alicia pushed Xavier away with all her strength, and without a second thought, she grabbed a knife. She wasn't going to let this trash live any longer. In a flash, she made a run for it, but Xavier was not far behind. Despite his strength, he reached for her, but Alicia fought back with a fierce strike, leaving a scar on his neck. She had dared to injure the future ruler, something no one had ever done before. Xavier, stunned and infuriated, would have to accept it. Alicia kicked him hard in the solar plexus and fled. Against all odds, Alicia, the girl who was supposed to die in the raging waters, had survived and returned home. The trauma of the event had caused her to lose her memory, but perhaps this was fate's gift. Xavier would marry her and ruin her life, but no matter what, she would still belong to him. The scar on her neck throbbed painfully, a constant reminder of what was to come. Meanwhile, in the Imperial Palace, the Empress, her son Marcus, and the main character were having their meal. The son of the Empire had returned, and it was a miracle that he could see again after all this time. The Empress was relieved, but she was also frustrated by the fact that Marcus had not returned to the palace sooner. She was concerned that the light could have harmed his eyes, and she was even more upset that Marcus was the last to hear about his beloved nephew's recovery. The most important thing, however, was that Elon could see again. In celebration of his recovery, the Empire would hold a grand feast. The The Empress made sure to say that the past should stay in the past, and if Elon wished for anything, his uncle would reward him generously. The Empire was eager to honor Elon's return. As the conversation shifted, Duke Claven asked for his uncle's permission to marry. The Empress, understanding the circumstances, knew this was not the right time for a wedding. Elon had not left his estate since his return, and yet Xavier, the only descendant of Odor, was now announcing that he had found a candidate for his wife. It was all happening too quickly, and the Empress felt uneasy about what was to come. The Emperor's position had always been fragile, and the matter at hand was no different. He agreed that the Duke's request for an official decree was reasonable, though the matter of Elon's choice of partner was a more complicated issue. Duke Claven asked for a promise from His Majesty that he would not oppose whoever Elon chose. The Emperor smiled, glad to see his nephew recovering, but the request for a decree was not a simple one. Elon's chosen one was rumored to be an escaped slave from a neighboring country. Why should such a person be acknowledged in an official decree? However, the Emperor understood that if the girl turned out to be a commoner, it would work in the favor of his son. Xavier, who was meant to inherit the Scarlet Eyes, had been born flawed, yet he was still destined to be emperor. The Empress had been pleased when Elon lost his sight, as it put her heir's position in jeopardy. Now that Elon was recovering, the Empress was eager to see him married. The Emperor quickly issued a decree about the marriage of the best warrior in the Empire, a simple task. This decree was Elon's only chance to marry Lorena, and it was more valuable than any reward. Meanwhile, Bernard focused on the management of the Claven estate, while Elon, alongside Cedric, searched all the local guilds in the capital for any sign of Lorena, but found nothing. Elon knew he couldn't just run around asking questions, it would jeopardize Lorena's reputation. Still, something about the whole situation bothered him. Had he been searching in the wrong places all this time?